Welcome to the News Underground. I'm Abandoned Nihilism. Today we're going to look at a wonderful interview by Brianna Joy Gray and Chris Hedges about the quality of leadership that we're getting from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. It's an interesting interview. I'm probably gonna disagree with some points, and you're probably gonna hear me agree with a lot more. So let's get right to it and see where this goes. I've had this on hold for far too long. Time to get the ball rolling on this one. Maybe turn the music down. Big props to Rye Chained Beast here, produced by SLVG and Tundra Main. I'll put the link in the description for you. All right, let's get this going. Is AOC a good leader? That's the question, right? Can she get it done? Could she be maybe the millennial choice for president once, all this Joe Biden, Ron DeSantis stuff is over? You tell me. Let me know in the comments.
What AOC does or doesn't do is kind of irrelevant, I think. What's relevant is that we get out and support those people on the ground that are building movements to push back. That's our only hope.
Damn.
If you actually confront the centers of power the way Julian did or the way Snowden did and hurt them, then you get to see how power works and how vicious they are.
Exactly.
That's what politicians do. That's their job, to gaslight and manipulate people. That is a politician. I mean, what do you think the main characteristics of a politician is? It wasn't because I was doing Russia propaganda. It's because with the 2017 Director of National Intelligence report, in those 7 pages, they gave a voice to Black Lives Matter activists, party candidates, anti-imperialists, and that's why they came for me. I mean, look, Brianna, they're just politicians. I mean, that's who they are. These are a very flawed class of human beings.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, but when you don't have anything else, when it feels like
we got some else called Amazon workers. That's what we got, and they're not the left. They're not like wasting their time destroying each other on Twitter.
Well, I want to ask you about that. I mean, what do you make of this infighting now, this conflict between members of the left?
As we say in Arabic, kalam fadi, which means empty talk. I'm not on Twitter. It's just an utter waste of time. I remember I was with Noam Chomsky, and I had a phone. He goes, I can't believe you got one of those things. I mean, Noam is definitely more pure than I am. I kept missing appointments because my agent would I had like a little flip phone until everybody else had smartphones for years. But I would go to lunch. My agent wasn't there because she'd go, oh, well, I texted you. And so I'd like to throw my phone, and like anybody, it kind of draws you in very pernicious ways. The real left in this country is not tweeting, hate messages because people are anti-vaxxers.
All right,
or whatever the hell they...
but the reality is that there is some cohort, maybe they completely don't matter, but there is some cohort of people who saw that. So here's what happened. I'm sorry to have to be the one to deliver this news, but I do think that's sometimes what happens online matters. So as I understand it,
I agree.
On the precipice of Amazon's victory, AOC quote tweeted, an article about how the vote tally was coming in with 3 strong arm emojis, basically approving, yes, And some people were frustrated with this because they felt as though she had abandoned the workers' plight. It's not in her district, but it's near to her district. Apparently, she was scheduled at some point to stand with demonstrators and had to cancel due to what she says is a scheduling conflict. And some people felt like she was kind of stealing valor, as it were, by quote tweeting this article.
I'm one of those people.
And whatever you think about whether or not that's accurate or whether a quote tweet is pretty...
No, I heavily criticized her for that. You don't come in at the last motherfucking second and say, oh, I support it, after they've secured the dub. AOC, stick your little... Let's not get sexist. Stick your neck out, please, AOC. Okay? We want a fighter. We don't want someone that comes in once everyone's won and been like, hey, how'd I do? You're like, you weren't here. You don't get to claim this victory.
An offensive or what have you. It has become a lightning rod for people who have this criticism of the squad that says, you should have been using your platform. You should have been using your Twitter account with 11 million followers. You should have been using the fact that you can get these interviews in New York Magazine and Vanity Fair and stuff to draw attention to the plight of these Amazon workers and boosted them in a way that you haven't done.
Right. Well, she's been told by Pelosi and the Democratic leadership exactly how far she can go if she wants to keep her seat, and she's decided to keep her seat. Bernie's the same. Bernie's no different. I mean, that's how politics works.
God, I hate how right he is.
I don't expect much from politicians. You know,
I hate it. I don't like to be Mr. Cynical. I'm abandoned nihilism over here, right? Like, there's always a way forward, even in the darkest of times. And if we don't believe that, what are we doing, right? But sometimes the cynics are right. Sometimes the people who are being critical are right. Chris Hedges is not often wrong. Okay.
You know, Ralph Nader says our last liberal president was...
He fucking loves Ralph Nader, by the way.
Richard Nixon. Because we still had movements, and he was scared of them.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful scene, I've often quoted it, from Kissinger's memoirs, where there's tens of thousands of anti-war protesters surrounding the White House. And Nixon has put empty city buses around it. And he's terrified. He's looking through the window saying, they're going to break down the barricades and get us. So it's movements. I mean, Howard Zinn, I think, put that argument to rest in a people's history of the United States. Every opening, the country was founded as a very retrograde, anti-democratic.
I say this all the time.
Slave-holding, aristocratic. I mean, George Washington was the wealthiest person in the United States. And every opening was paid for with blood. Workers, civil rights workers, abolitionists. You know, all of them. And that is the true history. That's
nothing we hold dear was just given to us. We had to fight for every single thing. 8-hour work week, fill in the blank, okay? They give us nothing, okay? This liberal idea that things are just going to get better is ridiculous. We have to fight. We have to fight. Real activism. Oh, I don't have time. Do you got time to pay more for groceries? You got time to pay more for gas? You got time to get less from your job, less retirement? You got time for all these other things, fucking up your life, but you got no time to make your life any better? If we don't fight now, we will lose our opportunity to fight. We're going to lose our democracy. That gives us this opportunity to fight. Okay? And we'll end up just like Russia, where we don't get a choice. We do what we're told. You know? Could you imagine the Iraq war done by Russia? Oh yeah. Get sent off to war. Good times. Not just the poor people. Oh no. You too, buddy.
Why his book is so important. So I just don't waste a lot of time on politicians.
I guess part of my frustration, though, is that it does feel like it lets these folks off the hook, whether or not you believe they're acting in good faith or whether they've been censored by Democratic establishment and their hands have been tied or whatever. We've never had politicians that have, at least elected politicians at this level, who have marketed themselves and framed themselves as conduits of the people's interest so directly, elected with grassroots money, genuinely so, genuinely free from that kind of base level of corruption that most of the corporate Democrats have. And when we say that they're powerless, I guess my knee-jerk response, my unwillingness to accept that isn't because I think that they are like superhuman and I think they can just like will good things to happen, but because it feels almost like letting them off the hook for not doing what they said they were going to do.
For not doing, exactly.
If what made Nixon our last progressive president was school buses and protesters in the thousands around circling the White House, then look, why isn't AOC and the rest of them with their huge platforms calling for people to show up on April 4th for the student debt protest in front of the White House?
Where's
because she doesn't want to...
Where's Destiny?
...be targeted by the Democratic leadership the way Dennis Kucinich was targeted.
Exactly.
I mean, isn't it more fair than to say that not that she's powerless, but that she refuses to use her power?
Well, she's decided that her career is more important. She's not going to stand up and deep six her career. That's not uncommon among politicians. And it's not true that we didn't have progressive politicians. And we had La Follette, we had all sorts of figures in the 30s and 40s who came out of the labor movement, Eugene V. Debs, Henry Wallace. I knew George McGovern at the end of his life. McGovern was real. he was real. And of course, once he got the nomination, you had the Democratic hierarchy join forces with the Republican hierarchy to destroy him. When I was 14, I convinced my parents to let me work 10 hours a day in the local George McGovern headquarters.
Whoa.
And I think when I had dinner with him, he was in his 80s. And I said, and you never sold me out, which is why I'm here. You did not sell me out. No, that gets into the whole issue of the military-industrial complex, because the last two presidential candidates that actually took on the military-industrial complex were Henry Wallace in 1948, who had been Roosevelt's vice president, and McGovern, and they were destroyed. And we are now watching this conflict in the Ukraine. So I was in Eastern Europe in 1989. I covered the revolutions there as a reporter for the Dallas Morning News. First of all, we all thought NATO was obsolete because NATO was formed to block Soviet expansion into Central and Eastern Europe, which shows you how naive we were. And we thought there really would be a peace dividend, that they wouldn't throw staggering amounts of resources and money towards the military, which is totally out of control. Again, it shows you how naive we were. Every politician across the political spectrum, including Henry Kissinger, said, do not expand NATO beyond the borders of a unified Germany. It's an unnecessary provocation. George Kennan lived long enough to call it one of the greatest mistake of the Cold War.
Has anyone asked him to follow up on those statements in this context?
I don't know. There's a person I try very hard not to follow. But it was universally understood.
For those that are just watching this video, have never seen my content before, I definitely agree with Ukraine defending itself, and I agree with the United States and their Western allies giving Ukraine weapons to defend itself. But I also am a lifelong critic of NATO and its aggressive actions. This idea that, there are still people that are parading around this idea that NATO is a peaceful organization, defensive organization, I should say. And, their bases and missiles that they've set up along the border of Russia there are purely defensive. It's utterly ridiculous. And if we're going to critique empire by critiquing Russia and its obviously illegal and unjust and immoral invasion of Ukraine, we have to point the spotlight at not only the United States, but the Western allies in general, and of course anyone involved in NATO, Canada, anyone contributing to NATO and who agrees with NATO and Western dominance over the globe. There are serious questions about that. Does the United States and Western allies have the right to control the world and things like that? Lefties should be smart enough, should be capable of having both of those conversations. What you see on Twitter is what you see a lot on social media, which is just a boiling down of issues into very simple, diametrically opposed options. Like, rah, I'm for Ukraine. That means I'm for NATO and I'm for the U.S. and I'm for the U.S. giving out weapons. And anytime the U.S. did that in the past, it's a good thing. And NATO's history is a good thing. And, or it's like, NATO's bad. Everything the U.S. does is bad. And that's the conversation on social media, and that's why Chris Hedges, who's a very smart and nuanced person, doesn't get anywhere fucking close to social media. Okay, so there's actually a way to have a conversation about criticizing Russia and their empire, and also criticizing NATO and the United States and their empiric ambitions as well. You can actually do that without being worried, without having to worry about being called a hypocrite by Fart Sniffer 69 on Twitter. Anyway, back to it.
Understood. I mean, Hans-Dietrich Genscher was the German foreign minister, Margaret Thatcher. They promised Gorbachev, and Clinton then promised the Russian leadership that he would not NATO would not station troops. Well, that went down the tubes. I mean, so heavy betrayal, and given Russia's history, I mean, the country was destroyed by the Nazi invasion, and then a century before, Napoleon did the same thing. And the idea that NATO is a defensive force, try that out in Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya or Syria. I mean, it's just only Americans could believe something that ridiculous. So it was a multi-billion-dollar arms bonanza, and they seized it. And with all of the geopolitical consequences understood, I wrote a column for ScheerPost a couple of weeks ago that quoted a WikiLeaks cable from 2008, written out of Moscow, that said, don't do this, and actually talked about Ukraine being the flashpoint. So it was totally understood. It was like Chronicle of a Death Foretold. But they did it for money. I mean, it's the same.
And let's be clear, Chris, I've heard him say it in the past, and he'll probably say it in this interview. He does not condone the invasion, and he does not think it's justified because of NATO's actions, right? He's actually intelligent enough to be able to hold those two thoughts in his head without his mind blowing up like some people on social media, right? No, he does. Of course, he doesn't agree with the invasion of Russia, but he's providing context. It's like, this didn't just happen in a vacuum, just like 9/11 didn't happen in a vacuum. Oh, out of the blue. Whoa, where'd this come from? Right? No. There's actually a lot of U.S. Entanglements and military adventurism and coup attempts and successful and failed coup attempts and all kinds of chicanery fucking with people's governments and world, right? Oh, it just came out of the blue. We're the good guys. We're just sitting around eating ice cream and hot dogs, and then the bad Al-Qaeda came and got after us. Gol darn, they hate us because they hate us, as Hannity likes to say. No. Nonsense.
Same reason we stayed in Afghanistan. The problem is, Alexander Berkman called the military the enemy from within. The problem is we can't, and this is just symptomatic of late empire, we cannot control these forces. And they're stoking conflicts with China over Taiwan and baiting the Chinese in the South China Sea. And this is just crazy. It's just nuts.
Baiting? I mean, that... How do we quantify who's more, you know what I mean? How do we quantify this? How do we know how much, baiting? So if, you know what I mean? Because that logically, the logical conclusion of that argument is, if China invades Taiwan, well, it's because the United States baited them.
And of course, what are they doing in the Ukraine? They're funneling staggering sums of weapons. Germany has lifted its export on weapons. It's tripled its defense budget. It says it will now spend 2% of GDP on defense, which will make the German military the third largest in the world after China and the United States. I mean, it's all insanity. It's kind of like the stumbling into the suicidal folly of the First World War. This gets off AOC. I just don't waste a lot of time on AOC. She's a politician. I covered these people. I get the game. I know how it works.
But here's the issue, Professor Hedges, and this is what we ended up going back and forth about when you were on the show the last time with Shama Sawant, is that, okay, fine, it's not AOC. And also it's not labor because it's not developed enough. It's been neutered. It's suffering from 30 years of neglect from the Democratic Party and active suppression. Okay. I think everyone on the left is very adept at saying what it's not.
Yeah.
But in lieu of options of what it can be, you do find yourself grasping for straws and grasping for the idea that some of these electeds could rise to the occasion. Or
every lefty you talk to is going to roll their eyes when you talk about, oh, what about AOC for president? It's like, okay, what's the alternative?
At least wanting to expose them.
Gavin Newsom?
To me, it's a win-win. Either pressuring someone, the AOC and the squad. I don't always mean to target her. It's all of them. But you either pressure them and when they fail to meet, the moment, it exposes them for what they are, and people who still have confidence and faith in them and think that electoralism is going to get out of it or disabused of that, and we can all move on to something else. Or you pressure them and they actually rise to the occasion. But saying, oh, well, they can't do anything anyway, they don't have power anyway, to me that leaves them to continue to gaslight and manipulate folks into thinking that there is a path through that.
That's what politicians do. That's their job, to gaslight and manipulate people. That is a politician.
Yes, Chris, she understands that, but she's like, okay, how do we get out of this? That's the question she's asking, Chris. All right, you are laser beam accurate when it comes to pointing out what's wrong, but outside of activism, is it literally it? Is that all we got? Is just activism? And it's depressing if it's true, but that might be true. All we have is just social pressure and political activism to make this world a better place.
Politician. I mean, what do you think the main characteristics of a politician is? Brianna, before the show, I told you about Ken Heckler, who was the congressperson from West Virginia and who passed the black lung legislation. So miners who had black lung, coal miners, would get benefits. And Nixon didn't want to sign it. And so Heckler called a press conference and said, if he doesn't sign it, we'll shut down the coal production tomorrow, and there'll be a huge energy crisis. And Nixon couldn't sign it fast enough. He actually told me I didn't know if it was actually going to work, but that's how politics works. That's the game of politics.
You got to stick your neck out.
So why do you think there's no conversation?
No one wants to stick their neck out.
If you try to raise the idea of just talk about a general strike.
General strikes are political strikes. They're not strikes on Amazon. Those are on economic issues. By the time you reach the point of a general strike throughout history, you are attempting to overthrow a government. It's different.
I understand that. And we can talk about Amazon and any other given industry. But what I'm not going to do is sit here and point to random industries and say they should go on strike, right? That's not on me. And that's why I'm talking about a general strike, because I think it's useful rhetorically to get people in that mind frame to talk about historical examples of those. Because ultimately, isn't that what our goal is? Isn't ultimately what we're talking about is more revolutionary potential than just these one-off strikes?
It only comes when you have a highly organized base.
Yeah.
So then you have a
And that goes back to my 3-step program: inform yourself, join a progressive political organization, and put in the work. It's all about getting organized. Yeah. We can't do this unless we're working together. And that's why it's so beneficial to the right and to the oligarchy that the left loves to eat itself alive. We love it. We love it. Oh, we'd love to put a fellow lefty on the chopping block and fucking blast him apart. Him or her, them and they. Just fucking dissect them. Oh, yes. Eviscerate them right in front of us, right?
Unification of labor movements.
So let me ask you this. How do we get a highly unified? I really don't want to go on this circle again because I've done it so many times with so many guests, including yourselves. But this is I got to get off this carousel.
Solutions.
We can't do anything because we don't have a organized labor base. We can't have an organized labor base because so what is it that we can do?
It takes a long time to organize. And you have Starbucks
we have
workers.
To organize.
And,
there's no other alternative, Brianna, and that's what the millennials and Zoomers don't want to hear. They don't want to hear it. You got to get off your ass. You got to organize. You got to knock on doors. You got to talk to strangers. You got to do the whole fucking thing. That's the only way. You got to swallow your pride and disagree with someone and still work together with them. All the shit that lefties fucking hate doing. We just want to scroll and click some buttons, donate a little money, maybe show up once a year, right? And then fuck about for the rest of it. That's what we want. Too fucking bad.
It's a long process. It's not a flash mob. Flash mobs don't work.
And yet sometimes flash mobs happen and they are successful.
Name one.
These revolutionary, sometimes, in limited ways, France
No, they're spectacle. It's Guy Debord. Society is spectacle. Flash mobs, I actually went down to the Washington but what does Trump care? It didn't.
Let me ask you this, Professor Hedges. What's the example of when the long, slow organizing build has worked? Because nothing's worked. Everything's terrible everywhere. Nothing's worked by that metric.
That's not true. The Wobblies, the old CIO, the Communist Party, they were very effective. We kind of erased the Communist Party from American history. These were very effective labor movements. In fact, they were so powerful on the eve of World War I that Wilson, in the name of supporting the war, passes the Sedition Act and the Espionage Act, not to go after people providing government secrets to the Germans, but to go after the left. That's how Debs ends up in prison. That's how Emma Goldman gets deported. That's how the masses gets shut down. But that was the culmination of really decades. You go back to the 1890s and the robber baron issue. it takes a long time to build that stuff up. But it works.
So the solution is we need to start, Brianna.
Even if that's true, I think that it is counterproductive to people's investment in any kind of political organization to say that like that. Because I'll tell you what, I care about a lot of things quite a bit. Sure. If you tell me it's going to take a long time and not within my lifetime and it's going to be 40 years down the line, I will happily pack it up and go back and work for corporate America, make as much money as I can.
Well, I mean, whose problem is that, though? That you want to embrace nihilism instead of building something that you could give to your kids, your potential kids. Maybe you don't, maybe you don't have kids yet, but that's a lack of, I mean, isn't that on you? Isn't that a personal failure, right? That you're so self-absorbed that if it's not going to benefit you immediately, you find it perfectly logical to say fuck everything and not put any effort towards making the world a better place. It's a little bizarre.
And live my life and die. I'll just live my life and die because
I believe that's nihilism.
That's the best I can get. I'm not going to waste my entire life and the little glimpse of animation that I've been granted, the spark of life on this earth, toiling so that maybe 100 years from now, somebody can have a $15 minimum wage.
That's how it works, though. You're benefiting off the efforts of people that couldn't imagine the benefits that you're enjoying when they were fighting for them. This is how humanity works. This is how generations work. I really do feel like this is kind of a fault of ego here. This feels like a millennial problem, maybe even a Zoomer problem as well.
Like that's not it.
Gen X too, probably.
It's not going to take 100 years. But to build a solid labor organization is 1-2 years of really on the ground work. But we're watching it. We're watching it again in Amazon. We're watching it in Starbucks.
Yeah.
We are seeing it,
fast food.
And that's and once you build, the only power we have are numbers and the ability to throw a wrench into the capitalist machine.
That's right.
But that's why this matters, Professor Hedges. Like I appreciate why you don't want to care about Twitter, but the reality is, it's like being in 1930, 1940, and saying your ability to disseminate your political views through the newspapers or to have any kind of pamphlets disseminated or conversation pieces out there about what your goals are is irrelevant because you don't like newspaper. I mean,
well, that's not
people are getting their news.
Yeah, that is not I know she's having problems like, and I've been in her position where you're grasping for a good comparison and you can't quite make one. And it's not a very good comparison.
Brianna, how many characters, what is it, 177 words on Twitter? Is that what you get?
It's 240 now. It's 240.
Is it up to 240? Now, tell me that you can actually communicate a serious idea in 240 words.
It is, to defend Brianna, it absolutely is. There's twit longer, there are videos, there are just multiple tweets, there's tweet threads. I've spent hours in single threads reading videos, context, sources. It can actually be an incredibly useful data aggregation tool that could be, amazing for learning about a certain subject. And, and this is kind of his boomer mentality. He's kind of sticking through because, I mean, look at him, he's read every book on the shelf, I guarantee it, multiple times. Okay. This is how he's absorbed information his entire life, Of course, he would see other ways of doing that inadequate. But to be fair, you don't get very good long-form content. When's the last time you've read 25 pages? Not on Twitter or something linked off Twitter that you connected to. It's a much longer PDF document that you scrolled through and you read every page. It was a short story. It was a research paper, whatever, fill in the blank. When's the last time you've actually done that?
I that get communicated. The entire media class is basically only consuming. No one wakes up in the morning and like says, I'm going to open the New York Times anymore. You go to your Twitter feed and you have a curated list of news to read, including people's Substacks like your own and like and David Sirota's and all of that. It comes funneled and aggregated through your timeline based on the people that you follow. And the entire journalistic class, rightly or wrongly, like it or not, is online and creating news cycles based on what is happening online, and it has a trickle-down effect through the rest of the media sphere.
Right. No. So in that sense, the ability to disseminate articles is useful, and you know, I am on social media. I don't run my Twitter account, but someone else does, and they post all my articles and my interviews and all of that. So being able to disseminate information, but actual education, which has to be part of any radical movement, it's very hard to do on social media.
And we see this on social media, right? Because we have people who kind of have the right idea, right? They kind of have the right idea, but they really have no fucking clue on how to get there, and they glom on to general ideas that are often incorrect and presented by hucksters that are like, I'm an expert, I'm in this, I'm that. And they say, oh, well, this expert that he did all the reading for me. So I don't really need to think. Because I like this guy. I agree with this guy. He sounds right. I'm not going to really look into it. There's my ideology. That's what you see on social media all the time.
Right. But AOC has 11 million followers. And more than that, she has call and text lists with a commensurate number of people or more. And the question is, what people are arguing about on Twitter right now is whether or not she had an obligation to use that to funnel people to support the Amazon protest strike, to support protesters directly who live in her district and beyond, and to be calling for people to come to events like the Medicare for All protests, like these student debt protests and the like. And the reason why it matters is because if what you say is accurate, and she's basically been cowed by Nancy Pelosi and the like, and they're all useless, that's fine, well and good. But the problem is they're still out there publicly presenting us the face of the progressive movement.
Yeah.
And they have audiences and support structures that are far beyond the progressives that got them elected. And yet they're still manifesting them. They're still kind of cosplaying, as some people would say, as leftists. And I think that ultimately has the possibility to really hurt a genuine left movement. If someone like, and again, I don't mean to, she's just a stand-in for the rest, but if someone like an AOC is being held up as this is what a progressive is, when there's actually a genuine appetite for sincere progressivism as evidenced through all of these strikes and whatnot. So either you have to fell her and reveal her for who she is, if that's the case, or push her to live up to the potential of what she said she was going to do.
Well, she isn't. I mean, I know a real progressive. His name's Ralph Nader. And look what happened to him. If you're a real progressive and you're not going to sell out, they're going to disappear you. This is a very dirty battle. I mean, especially
Can we
because
talk about politicians
of the corruption.
that are still
I
in
just
office,
came back
please?
from London with Assange's wedding. Look what they're doing to Julian. If you actually confront the centers of power the way Julian did or the way Snowden did and hurt them, then you get to see how power works and how vicious they are. And I just don't invest energy into AOC. I don't care. When she was elected, I never expected much from her. Yes, you're right, but she's caught up in this kind of celebrity universe of, and she has, I'm sure, 11 million. I mean, she's part of the celebrity culture. But I don't take her seriously. I don't think anyone else should either.
That sucks.
I'm not even saying she's a bad person. But that's not where what AOC does or doesn't do is kind of irrelevant, I think.
I feel like Chris Hedges is kind of stuck in the old world a little bit, where you had leftist cult of personalities that were outside of the rungs of power, who then were thrusted into power. It really does feel like he's completely lost faith in the ability for the left to I don't know, hold power, have power, in the current paradigm. Yeah, I can see the frustration on Brianna's face right now, because it's like, okay, what's the plan, hotshot? I think just ask him the question then.
What's relevant is that we get out and support those people on the ground that are building movements to
Chris
push
Smalls.
back. That's our only hope.
Chris Smalls, yeah. And other organizers, yeah.
I was just telling someone this the other day.
Yeah.
I started writing in part.
Yeah.
I was an anonymous attorney.
And we could do both, right? We could politically pressure AOC while also joining with and agreeing to and supporting on the ground organizers as well. 2016.
And I started writing in part because in the context of Bernie's race, obviously Ta-Nehisi Coates had written that article critical of Bernie and basically criticizing him over his reparations stance. And yet I had read in an interview, I'd seen in an interview that he was going to vote for Bernie. And so I tweeted at him from my then, 200 follower Twitter account. Can you please just write an article articulating why it is you're voting for Bernie? Because obviously, despite the criticisms, you think he's the best choice, but everyone's taking your reparations criticism as evidence that he's not the best candidate and he's not the best candidate for Black America and all that. And at the time, Ta-Nehisi Coates was considered to be, he was like the voice of Black America, whatever that means. And he, more importantly, had an enormous influence in kind of white liberal spheres, and what he said was good for Black America is what guilty white liberals were going to believe and then vote accordingly. And he tweeted back at me. I was very surprised. And he said, I can't write every article. You should do it. Now, I was very chagrined because obviously nobody gave a damn what I had to say about anything. I was an anonymous human being. And the whole point was that he had this influence, rightly or wrongly. He has the influence.
You got the power.
And I wanted him to use it for good since he had already used it for evil, as far as I was concerned, in doing this Bernie hit piece. And then it was particularly hypocritical, in my view, that he would knowingly know that Bernie was the best candidate and vote for him, and yet allow his own words to be used against the candidate that he thought was best for Americans.
Yeah, because he's a liar.
I did start writing after that because I was pissed off. Not that I could possibly have any impact in the context of the 2016 cycle, but I started a podcast like a month before that election. I started writing in 2017, and then we were off to the races. And so maybe I'm wrong, and I completely acknowledge that I'm wrong. I can be wrong about this or be holding out false hope. But when you do see someone who has influence and is unwilling to use it, and has represented themselves
I argue this all the time.
Wanting what you want.
Exactly.
It strikes me as a missed opportunity not to press them on those things. And that's why I had Rokana on the podcast this last week. And I wanted to ask you about
if they don't use their power, in my opinion, they're liars and they're cowards. You say you want it, you get into a position of power where you can get it, and then you don't want to stick your neck out to grab the brass ring. You're a fucking failure. Okay, and you have the right to be criticized. God damn it. You're not going to fill me full of false hope and then right at the moment of execution, fumble, and then you expect what? Kind words from me? Absolutely not. If you tried the best you could and couldn't get it, that's a different story. But if you're not even going for it, this is not a conversation.
One clip in particular because you came up. And you came up, Professor Hedges, because we were talking about Russia and Ukraine. And I got to tell you, I was very surprised by how naive, perhaps, he seemed about the whole thing. Maybe it's an act. I talked with Max Blumenthal last night about it on a live stream. And some people thought that it was an act. But we were having this back and forth about America's role in the conflict. And whether or not, if you want to look through a contributory negligence framework or whatever, obviously you have to acknowledge that Putin just didn't do this out of nowhere. And if you're interested in making peace, you have to engage with what precipitated the war.
Yeah. And I've said this from the beginning that the United States should close a NATO base as an opening salvo in peace discussions with Russia. Hey, get Putin on the phone. Hey, man, get out of Crimea, get out of Donbass, get out of Ukraine. I'm closing a base today. I'm gonna put the order today. If I start seeing you pull out, I'm putting the order in today. We hear you on NATO, and we're gonna make some changes. They never do that because, like I've said before, the way that the United States does diplomacy is sticks a gun to the world's head and says, do what the fuck we say, or I'm going to pull the trigger. And they've pulled the United States has pulled the trigger many times. This is not a fucking bluff. All right? And people like Chris Hedges gets that. And it's like, well, how can you operate in that framework and pretend like it's a fair deal?
And he seemed to not know anything about Victoria Nuland or the U.S.'s role in the 2014 Maidan coup. And when and he had this exchange, I'm sure you saw, or maybe you didn't see because you're not online, with Max Blumenthal, where he approached him outside a restaurant, asked him some questions. He posted it to the internet saying that Ro Khanna's responses sounded like a neocon. And Ro Khanna responded on Twitter saying that he's like an RT contributor and that Max Blumenthal was basically wrong and incorrect.
Max Blumenthal is biased, pro-Russian. Frankly, he does hit pieces against Ukraine. And I've seen his work on the gray zone. I do not think it's unbiased. It's clearly biased. Okay, I don't know why he's so friendly with Russia. I don't understand the connection. But the last time we saw Max Blumenthal on the stream was when he was interviewing this pro-Russian ex-military guy who was like, some MAGA dude. All about how we're gonna take Ukraine back and all this and that, and Max was rah, go along. He's absolutely pro-Russian biased, absolutely. He has done good work. He does good work, and I'm not saying some of the things he brings up about Ukrainian war crimes is inaccurate either. But there is a clear bias, and you just need to take a single glance at his Twitter to see that. There is no questioning this. Okay, and if you're sitting there scoffing and crossing your arms, I encourage you to go to his Twitter and show me the tweet, please. Abandon Nihilism on Twitter. Please show me the tweet from Max Blumenthal that explicitly says Russia is not justified in invading Ukraine, because that is literally the sentence he refuses to acknowledge, that Russia has no right to invade Ukraine. Okay, even with all the NATO shit and everything like that, that is never, ever, ever mentioned. Okay, and I understand Brianna's friends and all that stuff, but the man is clearly biased for Russia. I don't know why. I don't know what the motivations are. I just see what he puts down on paper, and it's pretty fucking clear. It's friendly to Putin. Hey, and if I had Max right in front of me, I'd ask him this simple question. And that before any other questions were asked, is Russia justified in invading Ukraine? That is the critical and most important question when it comes to journalistic integrity in this, because you can criticize the United States and NATO and empire and oligarchy and everything all day, every day. I fully support you in doing that. And if we're going to be consistent, we have to point out that this is not justified, regardless of NATO's aggressive actions towards NATO or Russia.
And the implication of being an RT contributor is obvious, And so I said, do you have a problem with RT? And what do you think about the RT ban? And he's like, well, I believe in free speech, but I don't understand why anyone would have to go on RT to have a platform when there's all these other places to go. And I said, really? Really, Congressman Khanna?
Really?
People like Chris Hedges and Cornel West say all the time how infrequently they're allowed to go on mainstream networks. Cornel West says basically there's one guy at CNN who will have him on, one host, and that's it. And he says, well, if you're a tenured professor, if you're a Princeton professor, if you're a Harvard professor, I have a hard time believing that that's the case.
There are places, perfectly other appropriate places of dissent, but I don't think we need to give Putin, who is engaged in basically war crimes, a platform.
So Chris Hedges is an academic. He's a professor at Princeton, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, longtime journalist at the New York Times, who had a show on RT that was canceled as a consequence of this. The record, the historical record, the archive of these shows in many cases is missing forever. And there have been journalists like Abby Martin, who was recently on Bad Faith podcast, who are quite notable for being openly antagonistic and critical of Russia and Putin in the context of the 2014 coup. Do you see a similar level of criticism of America's involvement and role in the 2014 coup in Ukraine in the mainstream news? And are you yourself critical of America's role with Victoria Nuland and the like in 2014?
Well, first of all, I would defend the Princeton professor or the other journalists' ability to have their views. They don't have to go on Russia TV. There are plenty of outlets in the United States or Europe or other places.
Are there?
Absolutely, that they can get on. And I mean, if he's tenured at Princeton, that's a pretty privileged position.
Oh, yeah, CNN's just going to let you on the air, huh? Really? Does this guy live in fucking La La Land?
To be in that can have your views heard. And I would defend his right of free speech and to publish, to be heard, to be on podcasts.
What's your response to that?
Well, I'm not tenured at Princeton. I'd never make it through a tenure committee. I've done visiting professorships there, 3 of them. I mean, most of my teaching is in the prison with Rutgers University, and I'm paid an adjunct salary. In fact, I was giving my salary back until it became forbidden for some reason, but it's only like $4,500. So Cornell was denied tenure at Harvard because, like me, he supports BDS.
Right.
Yeah.
Now that alone is going to get you. And then, of course, we're both fierce critics of the Democratic Party. So when Cornell began to speak out against actions that Obama was taking, he became not only become a non-person, but he was excoriated on black media. And that was run out of the White House. So the idea that there are plenty of places is just an inability to understand the uniformity that has gripped the American media on all of the major issues. And MSNBC is one of the worst.
Yeah.
We can start with Julian Assange. When I sued Obama over Section 1021 of the National Defense Authorization Act, which overturned the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act, in essence, allowing the U.S. military to be used as a domestic police force in American streets, it wasn't covered by Fox or MSNBC or anyone. Actually, in fact, the only 2 organizations that covered it were Court News, and they did a good job because they cover courts, and my old employer, the New York Times, which actually we won, surprisingly, in the Southern District Court in New York. And the New York Times wrote an editorial lauding the decision by Judge Catherine Forrest. It was overturned. Obama immediately appealed it. So if you are a critic of those systems of power without being partisan for one or the other in this climate, you don't have a platform. Look, I understand fully why RT put me on. I'm a fierce critic of corporate capitalism, of U.S. imperialism, U.S. militarism, the endemic racism and white supremacy that governs this country. It's the same reason I knew Václav Havel. I covered the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia. I was in the Magic Lantern Theater every night with him. You wanted to hear Havel, you had to turn on Voice of America. Havel had no more love for Washington's policies than I have for Moscow. But it was that or not be heard. And now I'm in a situation where the only place I can go, like my friends Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi, is Substack, because I got to pay the rent.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't, there are plenty of places to go if you're unpaid, like SheerPost. I mean, Bob Scheer's wonderful, and I will stay with him forever, but he's trying to run that thing with his Social Security check. So if I can get enough subscribers, then I'll be able to continue to write my column and will resurrect my television show, which was previously on Telesur, by the way. So it was.
Yeah, and I think he resurrected his show on the Real News Network. Make sure you check it out, like and subscribe. Love the Real News Network. They're based out of Canada. And yeah, they snagged up Chris Hedges. Boy, that's a big get. That's a big get. They've been needing a Chris Hedges for a long time. They went through a rebrand. They probably were rebought or something like that. But oh yeah, I've been watching the Real News Network since the Paul J days. So definitely check Chris Hedges out on the Real News Network.
Was actually came out of the left, but it's going to be. But and now you're hearing all these calls to shut down Substack. for the same reason.
For folks who don't know what happened to your show, can you give us a gloss?
Right. So look, I was probably finished at RT anyway because I denounced very publicly the invasion of Ukraine for what it is as a war crime. Preemptive war under post-Nuremberg laws is a criminal war of aggression, and I wrote it and said it. So I didn't expect, like Jesse Ventura, who to his credit did the same thing. I didn't expect a long life anymore. RT, the place went dark in 6 days, but I can't imagine Moscow would have put up with that.
I heard you say that to Lee Camp, and he pushed back a little, saying that he's never had any issue being critical of Russia on RT. And Abby Martin said, she obviously was very famously took a stand against the annexation of Crimea.
Well, I have a hard time believing that RT would have swallowed, that in the end it was...
Especially looking at how their state media is running right now with just it's like World War II Germany over there on Russian right-wing media. I mean, just their media, it's all right-wing. There's no left-wing media on Russian TV. Absolutely not. Had they kept the United States RT channel going, Chris Hedges and Jesse Ventura would have been the fuck gone. If they're criticizing this invasion, just calling it a war would have probably been enough for him to get kicked out, right? It's a special military operation, SMO.
It wasn't funded completely by Moscow. I mean, they had advertising, Aeroflot, so I think they made $8 million from advertising before YouTube ripped it down. So there were other sources of income, but they received money from the Russian government without question. So they wouldn't have done. Look at what Putin's done in Russia. He wouldn't have swallowed this. I had no. I mean, they were very good. They let me do what I wanted, and the very few I'd not one show on Russia, and the few times Putin came up, he was described in very unflattering terms. Matt Taibbi wrote a good piece about it and linked to one of those shows with Alan Nairn, where he kind of excoriates Russia for the war crimes it committed in Syria. Which was broadcast. But that's not why they shut it down. We know why they shut it down. It wasn't because I was doing Russia propaganda. It's because with the 2017 Director of National Intelligence report and those 7 pages that were dedicated to RT, they were very specific about why they hated RT. And it's because, and these are their words, you can read it online, they gave a voice to Black Lives Matter activists, Occupy activists, anti-fracking activists, third-party candidates.
I could have gotten a show on RT. If I had worked a little harder, you know what I mean? If you were critical of the United States and you were, presentable, they'd give you a show. Yeah. No. It was a great place to go if you were an anti-war progressive who wanted to criticize the United States and get some eyeballs on your content.
Candidates, anti-imperialists, that's why. And that's why they came from.
Hey, YouTube.
Oh, yeah. Make sure you like and subscribe to Bad Faith. Brianna Joy Gray is doing a great job. I always want to say Greyjoy, and I'm so sorry if I ever do that, Brianna. But no, she makes great content. She's an amazing journalist, incredibly smart. She's gonna go places. Let me tell you, folks. She's gonna go places. Okay, she's gonna go there. She's gonna be really great. She's already really great, but once she gets the attention of if she can. That's the thing, is that's what sucks about it. This is that people as talented as Brianna here will get ignored by the mainstream media if you're not saying the right things, you're not signing up, and as we saw with Crystal Ball, you can, and Cenk Uygur as well, you can get knocked down pretty quickly. They give you a chance to sell out, and they're like, oh, they're not selling out, time to go. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. Hope you enjoyed my reactions. Please let me know if you disagree. I'm sure you disagree with everything I said. Do that in the comments section, please. Let me know what you think about the format. Please don't be shy to check out the streams. We do a big one every Saturday, and then I'm going to try to do these little ones as much as possible throughout the week. Long form, single video reactions where we go in depth on a subject. To conclude this, if we're going to be talking about, is AOC a good leader? Right now, I would say I'm pretty on the fence about AOC in terms of is she a good leader? I think she's been effective in some places, but I mean, she was there for us when it came to the infrastructure bill. Remember, like, she said, no, the deal was to have these things tied to Build Back Better, and we were going to give the corporations a big fucking, blowjob, but we're actually going to get something out of it, and these bills are going to be linked, and that's the deal. Of course, Joe Manchin flipped the script. Pramila Jayapal said that's fine. Progressives will do whatever you want, like she always says, and it's history. And her and a few members of the squad voted against it, and they stayed consistent in their principles. But, then you have Chris Smalls and the Amazon thing, and there's other examples as well of her, pretending like if we go along with Nancy Pelosi and the the DNC and the neoliberals, that they're gonna fulfill their promises and help us out, and it's gonna be a and no, because we need some. Then, and this is why I'm on the fence about AOC, because we need somebody who understands these people are corrupt. They have to go. We're not there to make friends. I'm not your buddy, Nancy Pelosi. I'm actually your political opponent. I have a lot of negative things to say about you. I think you should retire. I would replace, you know what I mean? Like, AOC should be standing up and proudly say, I want to replace Nancy Pelosi as the leader. I have a vision for this party. I know what the direction we need to go in. I'm going to achieve that. Put me in charge. Support me. Get behind me. Here's my vision. And I don't see that. I just don't see that quite yet. And that's exactly what we need. So, quite frankly, if you're not there to do that as a progressive, it's time for you to move on. And it's perfectly okay for progressives to say, you're not what we're looking for, and you need to go. It's just how it goes. This is politics. You're there to serve the people, and if you're no longer serving the people, it's time for you to be replaced. This is democracy. This is not celebrity. This isn't dynasty creation. Okay? So AOC still has a chance, like it matters to her. I'm sure she stays up late at night thinking about what I think about her. But she still has an opportunity to be the one in my eyes. Right now, if she stays on this trajectory, I don't think that's the case. Maybe if I'm being generous, maybe she thinks I'm going to go along to get along until Nancy Pelosi croaks or retires. Then I'm going to go for the brass ring. That's a bad calculation. So once again, make sure you check out my Twitch channel, Abandoned Nihilism on Twitch. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe to all the YouTube stuff if you like what you see. We're going to be doing more of it. We do the real news here on the News Underground. Thank you so much for watching this YouTube clip. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
I'm legit, and I'm running shit. FBADE is business, did you have